Welcome, everybody. First things first, if you haven't already done so, please scan the QR code, take out your phones, scan the QR code, and answer the survey question. We're going to ask you the same question at the end of the debate, and we will post the results on impactdebates.com, so you'll actually be able to see what happened today. I'm Steve Hellman, by the way. I'm the managing partner of Mobility Impact Partners, which is a coalition of mobility stakeholders, auto companies, tier one suppliers, electric utilities, telecoms, finance, insurance, oil and gas companies, fleets, freight, logistics, also cities and municipalities that work together on common challenges, find solutions, invest in those solutions, and then kind of bring those solutions back into their operating businesses. We've teamed up with CoMotion, with Bain, with EPRI, with the Auto Tech Council, and others to organize the Impact Debate Series, where we basically tackle some challenges, some controversial challenges within the mobility ecosystem. Today's debate is on eVTOL. The resolution of today's debate is eVTOL will represent an important component of urban transportation within the next decade. Arguing pro that eVTOL will be an important element of urban transportation is Adrienne Lindgren, who brings perspectives from her experience in local government, engineering consulting, and now managing new mobility products and infrastructure at Supernal. Supernal, I got that wrong. Arguing con will be Mihir Rimjha, who literally did a PhD examining the economic and operational feasibility of urban air mobility, much through NASA Langley-sponsored research. And moderating the debate will be Seleta Reynolds, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at LA Metro and who needs no introduction to this audience. And if there were anybody that the two sides actually need to convince of their argument, it would be Seleta. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. The session is being recorded. Registered guests will receive a link to the recording. It also will be permanently available on the Impact Debates website. The debate's on the record. Members of the media are free to use the material. In that regard, please note, importantly, that all the debaters are here today in their individual capacities, not as representatives of their organizations or companies. There's not going to be a question and answer session, so if you have some questions, just come and chat with people afterwards. And the debate will follow a very structured format developed with the assistance of the American Debate League. Each debater will present their opening arguments for 6 minutes, followed by 3-minute rebuttals. Seleta will then drive them through 3 different topics before they make their closing statements. So the pro argument, Adrienne will always go first, followed by Mihir and Khan. Seleta, over to you.
Okay, should we just go over here and have a seat?
I think you guys just go and have a seat. Yeah, make yourselves comfortable.
Let's do it. All right, hi friends. So thanks for joining us. Adrienne and I were just talking about the fact that, you know, it's a beautiful sunny day outside in the city of Los Angeles. And I'm sure sitting in a darkened amphitheater talking about eVTOLs takes a special breed of co-patriot. So thank you for being here. And I just want to say, you know, when I came to the job I have before the one I have now at LA Metro, I was a general manager for LADOT for 8 years. And when I got to LADOT in 2014, I had 2 things on my mind. One of them was Vision Zero, and the other one was actually drones. Because at the time, the sort of idea of moving people in mass in vertical, takeoff and landing was still a twinkle in a, sci-fi writer's eye. But there were a lot of conversations about drone hobbyists. And I wanted to start a conversation about the value of public space that's above our heads. Because I'm very passionate about public space, and I'm passionate about the fact that public space ought to return dividends equitably to all of us who collectively own it. So as we talk about this topic, I have to admit that I am still quite skeptical that eVTOLs are really going to power a future transportation revolution that they are going to have a meaningful impact on congestion. I think there is a possibility that they could actually revolutionize the way we do small urban goods delivery. But I am not so cynical that I'm giving up hope. When there's billions of dollars in a private market thrown at a technology, I want cities and communities and neighborhoods to be at that table talking about outcomes. And so today I just want to challenge both Adrienne and both sides to just focus on those things. What real problems does this solve? And how can we keep our eyes focused on the tremendous challenges that transportation must address? Correcting racial and socioeconomic inequities, climate, public health, community happiness. Because the ability to learn from our past mistakes seems to continue to elude us. But as an eternal optimist, I remain hopeful that in conversations like these, we can really challenge ourselves. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Adrienne, and I'm going to keep time, which should be fun because I'm always late, which my staff can tell you. You're just going to kick us off and give your opening statement.
Great. Thanks everyone for being here today, and great to see some familiar faces and some new ones. And thank you to Seleta and Mihir for organizing, and Steve for inviting us to join. So I am what you might, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a technology evangelist, so this is an interesting role for me to be in. I got into the urban air mobility space because, to Seleta's point, with billions of dollars being funneled into such an industry, I think it's really important that we think methodically about how we can actually create a meaningful contribution to the transportation environment. I think we focused a lot on things like congestion, but I'm going to talk about some different sort of frameworks that I think can not necessarily, they're not sure to take place the way that they are, right? But I think that they are going to be the drivers that will keep us towards a North Star of ensuring that there are meaningful outcomes that result from air mobility that contribute to equity, increased access, increased affordability, and really contribute to placemaking and connectivity between communities. So I just wanted to sort of start with talking a little bit about population trends and implications. Factors of agglomeration coupled with a rift in sort of transportation demand and land use planning, in addition to individual development decisions, have really contributed, whether we like it or not, to a persistent pattern of what you would call urban sprawl, the dirty word, but sort of the truth of the matter. And I use the images that are before you to sort of demonstrate how we see population growth that has really spread out over time. People are less concentrated, and at the same time that presents different and unique challenges in how we can connect them and ensuring that some communities are not left out from being connected to others, being connected to the core network in dense urban areas where a lot of the economic activity happens. We're not in a position, which is increasingly the case, where people are having to live far outside of their communities to drive into economic centers. I think my other sort of point around UAM and why it could be a viable sort of solution to some of the customer frustration with transport is not necessarily that we're going to reduce congestion overnight. I think it's a little bit of a fallacy to say you're just reducing congestion. I think you're adding modal sort of choice and capacity to the network. And that's very, I think any transportation planner in the room probably knows that you don't ever solve congestion, right? You're just sort of redistributing people through other ways of getting around. The purpose of the slide that you're seeing really to say that while our options have increased, prices are also increasing rapidly. And this is actually a quite conservative estimation. This morning, I paid $12 per mile, right, to use an Uber. And at the same time, people's efficiency, sort of their ability to get from place to place is becoming more challenging because congestion has increased across the board. I also think that, AAM, if it's methodically planned into the transportation network, that is to say, accounts for a number of different factors, including the societal goals, objectives around green economy, social and racial equity, economic growth and opportunity. I think it can fill gaps in a transportation system by increasing connectivity between places that are currently difficult to serve or unsustainable using either traditional aviation technology or existing ground-based technology. And at the same time, I think it can contribute to placemaking through the implementation of lower impact and lower cost infrastructure than what would be required to connect those 2 points on the ground and potentially capture latent demand, with an emphasis on sort of location-based strategies and decisions that optimize micromobility, pedestrian access, and transit access to vertiports. And as we know, there is a demonstrable relationship between infrastructure investment and economic growth. There is not always a clear case for they may not have enough demand to build a high capacity fixed route transportation system that connects two places, and it's very hard to build that on top of communities that already exist, right? I worked on the before and after study on the Metro rail line back in the day, and it can be very, very challenging and disruptive in its own right. And sometimes, again, you don't have enough demand in one place or another, enough concentration of population that it really justifies it. That said, should those people be excluded from being driven into the network, for example, being able to access the transit services by going from a longer distance into that urban core. I also think that there's a really interesting opportunity to really leverage new aviation technology to increase asset utilization in communities that lost their economic engine. So we have a lot of airports, and there's a lot of studies that have come out about how the number of regional airports we have in the United States. That said, you have a fairly limited percentage of them that are actually being utilized. Which does two things. It creates sort of undue impact on people who live in those aviation heavy communities. So I think replacing with potentially revolutionary technologies that will really change the sort of impact profile of aviation is important. At the same time, can you look at different locations where you don't necessarily need to make really intense investments or large investments in the infrastructure, but you can provide the economic benefit of revitalizing that asset, right, which was presumably placed there for a reason, and especially when you look at sort of the proximity of how close people live to these different regional airports. I think there starts to become sort of a compelling constellation of location-based opportunities to generate economic opportunity and also increase access to a new transportation service within those communities. So this is all sort of to say, we leverage tech advancements and focus on a network level approach to developing the infrastructure. To me, that reduces the overall price point and distributes the benefits and the impacts more evenly and reasonably within communities. And I would say the key takeaway for me is that if the right planning process is followed, scale could be achieved that supports UAM as, I don't love the term revolutionary, but as a meaningful contribution to the transportation network, and then we have to focus on designing aircraft for consumer comfort, for needs, and a methodical approach to building that network. Presents a unique opportunity to reduce cost.
Excellent. All right, Mihir.
I'm just gonna do a quick mic check. Is it working? Oh, sorry. Thank you so much. Oops. Okay. So thank you so much. Today I will take you guys through a realistic perspective of passenger market of urban air mobility. Some people have been saying that the age of Jetsons is here and the air taxi is gonna be a commonplace, and we'll see, and it will be a considerable mode of transportation inside urban spaces. I have studied the feasibility of urban air mobility, and today I will try to convince you guys why urban air mobility has limited scalability and why you won't see hundreds of these eVTOLs flying simultaneously inside an urban space. So what is stopping UM from becoming a revolutionary mode in urban transportation specifically? We'll go through some barriers. The first one are the economic barriers, where we can see that very high cost of infrastructure. There's a very limited target market for this, and along comes the high development and certification costs. And then there are very tough operational challenges, which includes optimal placement of infrastructure to be able to efficiently capture the demand, and then integrating UM into already congested urban airspaces. And then the last, but the most important one, is relating to the public perception, which could alone affect the adoption of this mode. We will talk about this factor in detail. So the first problem is basically overestimation of target market. The travel times, in the long run, the major attraction for urban air mobility is basically travel time savings. And that can happen in two cases, either very long trips or very congested routes. Now, being able to capture or being for urban air mobility to be able to attract those passengers is very important to target the trips between 20 to 30 miles, because beyond 30 miles, the network becomes sparse, and your operational efficiency decreases, and also the total trip cost increases significantly compared to the alternative trip modes. And below 20 miles, generally speaking, the travel time savings are marginal, and the inconvenience due to transfers, waiting times, excess times is significant. So as you can see here, according to the NHTS, National Household Travel Survey, only 9 to 10% of trips are longer than 20 miles. So we need to that limits the target market significantly. So high vehicle development costs and certification costs are expected to drive the fare per seat mile higher, basically. And we have developed some life cycle cost models. And I can tell you guys that even with high favoring parameters, we were never able to get the fare per seat mile for less than $3 per mile 15 to 20 years down the line. Now, the major operational challenge is the location of infrastructure. That means you want to minimize the excess distance and excess times for the passengers. For that, you will need to provide infrastructure where people want to travel, which is basically high activity zones like central business districts, downtown, San Francisco Financial District, and Lower Manhattan downtown. And you can see why that's a challenge. According to the latest guidelines by FAA, you need almost 10,000 square feet of load-bearing surface to support just one verti pad with the critical dimension of 50 feet, which is, as you can see, which is very common in current prototypes. So just one verti pad requires 10,000 feet of load-bearing surface. You can see why that's a problem on being able to provide infrastructure at the optimal location. Now, the other operational challenge is basically cost and capacity. Real estate, and as we saw that we need to provide infrastructure where people want so we can minimize excess, but infrastructure is also, the real estate is limited in those locations. And as we can see, we use some helicopter guidelines to create some life cycle cost model and basic vertical designs with minimal operational footprint. And as you can see here, a pad with 6 parking spaces, which can support up to 30 operations, let's say 15 landings and 15 takeoffs, takes about 2 acres of space and costs anywhere between $5 to $6 million. And I want to note that and remind that we are using very favoring parameters here. Now, another challenge is integrating into already congested urban spaces. The demand or the potential exists in large urban areas, but unfortunately, the airspace is also the most congested in those urban cities called like spaces. So this is 1 day of traffic in over NYC area, and imagine how delay incurring and challenging this process would be to integrate like hundreds of eVTOLs flying already in a commercially congested area. Now we are talking about the public perception related issues. People are genuinely afraid of flying in small vehicle at low altitude, and it can get worse when there are high skyscrapers around, or when there is wind, gust, and any kind of inclement weather conditions. And also, people are in general less tolerant of accidents and more concerned about safety in aviation related mode.
All right,
So-
Mihir, you have to wrap.
Okay, yeah, so I mean, people would take their time, there would be very small, I mean, very slow adoption curve for this mode.
So I will stop you there. And just say, Adrienne has some great points about mobility deserts. You've all heard of food deserts, mobility deserts also exist. But Mihir also making a good point that while the FAA may let you fly, it's really cities that let you take off and land. And there are complex issues on the ground. So I'm going to give you each 3 minutes for rebuttal, starting with Adrienne.
Yeah, so thanks, Mihir. You made some great points. I think I'd like to highlight some counterpoints here. One is that I think Age of the Jetsons, there's a lot of branding in this industry, and I think we need to move away from the branding in order to actually make this a meaningful form and contribution to the urban environment and to non-urban environments. I also heard a lot of focus on urban dwellers, so a lot of downtown San Francisco, a lot of downtown Los Angeles, a lot of downtown New York City, but I showed some transportation maps earlier that show that people are living in a whole lot of different types of places that are not necessarily a downtown location. We've also provided different opportunities for how you can use, existing mobility infrastructure, existing aviation infrastructure to complement that network. And I would just say on the FAA piece, I think that is a document that's still very much under development and has not been finalized, and it looks very close to helicopter guidelines. And if the idea of this new transportation is to move away from helicopters, I think probably the standard will end up moving away from helicopters. The other just thing I would say is that, we focus so much on existing data and commuting networks and those, again, urban areas. Data will show you that people don't travel past 15 to 20 miles all that frequently. They do it. We're doing a lot of studies right now to understand latent demand. What would they do if they could travel further distances? But if you look at sort of the cost per mile, and that includes your personal vehicles, right, which tons of people are switching to electric right now across many income demographics because of those costs. I think basically what I'm trying to say is that we are focusing on a set of data that is people are constrained by a set of factors that limits their ability to go longer distances, right, and connect communities, even though those communities tend to be, especially in the case of Southern California, right, got almost 20 million people over 200 square miles. So I just think that there's a shift in narrative, and that's actually what's going to drive the industry towards making meaningful contributions and getting to a price point and getting to a type of network that supports this particular sort of technology as something that's more, quote, revolutionary than it is, say, a niche product.
All right. Your rebuttal.
Okay. So, I mean, there are some amazing points with Seleta, which Adrienne just mentioned. I would like to first counter there in urban transportation, unlike regional transportation, people shift modes. Just because a new mode is available, that doesn't mean that people will be able to move further away. And especially when we are talking about urban air mobility, it's significantly less reliable than any other ground transportation mode. Okay, today you think that you can move away from the city 20 miles out, and so you can commute or you can travel to spaces just using urban air mobility. Urban air mobility has so many unreliability related factors which you would need to consider. It's not something like heavy rail or your personal vehicle, which would be available all the time, which would be available in a minute or two. If you're particularly moving away to a sparsely populated areas, infrastructure there would be limited, and you would have more access times. The network is sparse, you won't always have the vehicle available there, and to be able to do that you need a large vertiport spaces. So basically the deadheading would increase. You will have to call vehicles from further away, which could increase the time. And in all, the reliability factor of urban air mobility decreases when we talk about people moving further away, just because they can now travel quickly using this mode. And it takes years and years of development for the land use to change and the built environment to basically build, and it's just not easy for people to just move away from cities further away. And just to point another thing that the cost of transportation is increasing, but what makes us think that is not going to be same for urban air mobility. Urban air mobility is in fact very much dependent on ground transportation for efficient access. With limited infrastructure, you need to bring together ground transportation for efficient access of the whole trip, because it's a multimodal concept. So that it literally shares a lot of characteristics with ground transportation and other types of transportation. So it will also be affected by the rising trend of transportation cost.
All right, Mihir, time's up.
Okay.
All right. Should we spice it up and just talk like geek out on economics for a minute? So I'm going to give you each 2 minutes to defend your cost curve for all of the business people in the audience. Oh, a business person. Welcome. Adrienne, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Seleta, and it's always fun to debate someone with a PhD with a lot of data they can talk about. I do not have data that I'm allowed to disclose, but in any event, so I'll just say that, as Mihir noted in his opening statement, cost curve is going to be driven by a value of time savings. And to me, that just puts significant pressure on the AM industry to conduct due diligence, to leverage data and collaborate across a lot of different stakeholders to identify the right locations where the time savings are optimized. And additionally, I do think that leveraging the, falling technology costs, reduce impact of those technologies on communities can still really revolutionize the state of the aviation industry in terms of operational costs and what becomes way more accessible than what we've seen previously. At the same time, the cost curve does reduce as the number of passengers increase and the network gets to scale, furthering the point that if done right from a holistic approach that enables AAM as a meaningful part of the transportation network, that really affordability increases, right? So again, I focus on process here. Land use policies do take a long time to change, which is why you have to start working on them and think about how you're going to demonstrate impact, benefit, contributions. I mean, I think this is the impetus on the industry in order to make this a meaningful form of transportation. Last, I'll just say, a combination of technology enablers, policies, practical service decisions, all of these contribute to bringing down operating costs. Open access infrastructure provides the most competitive value for consumers. And as business model innovation leverages willingness to pay, it can increase access to more people, which is something we already see in aviation today. Also to say that, new aviation can play a critical role in the green economy. Feasibility of other technologies has been demonstrated, like EVs, in part through government-sponsored incentivization towards green technology, which vehicle manufacturers and aviation are actively evaluating for their own products and services. And I do believe this applies to both the supply side infrastructure and the demand side on vehicle production. Lastly, I'll just say I think the more that we can cross, as all of the transportation verticals converge around the same technologies, as we leverage the same infrastructure to support multiple modes of transportation, will have more success in decreasing the overall costs.
All right. 2 minutes over to you, Mihir.
Okay, thank you so much. So, I went through multiple market studies during my research, and they have used different type of methodology, different types of data to be able to project the cost per passenger mile. Some OEMs say that it's going to be anywhere between 3 to 4, or some of them say that it's going to be more than 4. Some of the system analysis said that it's going to be close to $5 per mile. And we really need to ask this question that if this mode is going to be that costly, you need to design your network to capture the demand at that price point. With high price point, which is likely because you are putting so much money into the development, you will start the service with relatively higher price. You are further limiting the target market, and also being able to capture that demand in the target market, you need to design your initial vertiport network service operation, everything according to that target market. And unlike any other commodity, with more trips, it's very less likely that the price of ticket or price of using would drop because you have already designed your infrastructure, which is very costly. It's just not like any other ground transportation mode, not like ride sharing apps, which are using the same infrastructure. You have to develop infrastructure again to be able to further spread the market. And to do that, you need to again pump up the money. And it's very unlikely that you would be able to basically drop the ticket price. We did a commuter study in surrounding SF area with 17 counties and giving a lot of advantage to UAM without any like no kind of delays, weather delays or operational delays, and assume full adoption. And
Wrap it up.
we found just 0.05% of the demand that can be captured at $3 per mile, and we are talking about much higher price point. Yeah.
Adrienne, not to respond.
Yeah, so I would say, I think we tend to focus on new infrastructure a lot and the costs surrounding new infrastructure. And I don't disagree, infrastructure is expensive. It's, in fact, many projects that are currently slated are getting more expensive, right? Because of labor costs, construction materials, inflation. There's a whole lot of factors that are increasing infrastructure costs across the board. I would just posit that to the extent that, again, all of these new mobility technologies are converging around the same core set of enabling technologies, specifically around energy. I'll just use that one as a grounding example, because energy is often the most cost variable aspect of any project, building new energy systems in and accounting for that. I think that there's a couple of ways you can reduce. One is, again, leveraging multiple beneficiaries in the modal system from that new infrastructure and the new infrastructure upgrades. And secondarily, I'll just say, I think you can de-risk the infrastructure investments by focusing on those aspects and phasing the infrastructure in over time that most benefits multiple modes. That is to say, increasing grid resiliency and yeah, encouraging other modes.
Mihir.
Yeah, sure. So unlike any other transportation mode, urban air mobility, we need to be able for this mode to capture demand. I can't stress more that the infrastructure has to be in the right place. If someone wants to travel somewhere between, let's say, New York or Manhattan, like somewhere in the center, and you are thinking of using the existing infrastructure nearby as a mobility hub, that's gonna increase the excess time transfers by another 5-10 minutes, and that could basically be the majority of travel time savings you are able to offer to them. So any kind of excess waiting, walking time and the inconvenience which comes with it is very unattractive, especially for high-paying customers, which are paying a heavy premium compared to current transportation mode. And big mobility hubs. Okay, later.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about energy. So to bring us back here to state of California, planet Earth, Milky Way galaxy, where just this last summer, many transit operators that operate electric buses got a phone call from the state on a high heat day saying you cannot recharge your fleet during these periods because the grid can't withstand the demands. What does that mean as we think about, the life cycle costs, the tax on the grid, and our ability to meet the demand of an increasingly electrifying fleet on the ground, as we talk about, the cleanliness of these fleets in the sky? Because I can guarantee you that no mayor, no governor is at least in some of the highest value markets, is going to have any interest in opening the skies to vehicles that do not operate on clean energy. But when that clean energy is needed for a variety of different things, how do you square that? So 2 minutes for each of you to talk a little bit about eVTOL sustainability from an energy perspective.
Yeah, so I appreciate that prompting, Seleta. I think the takeaway that I hear from that, because I I'm with you, right? We're facing a fundamental challenge, and I don't think this is unique in the United States. This is a global issue as everyone tries to sort of rapidly convert to a green economy, is that there's not enough energy being produced, right? You don't have enough clean energy to actually support and power the wide range of vehicles that are relying on it. And I'll say a couple of things. One is that we are heavily focused on certain types of alternative energy. So we've hyper focused on batteries. Some of these may be battery electric, but for example, there are movements to look at hydrogen applications or hydrogen fueling, right, to charge those batteries to reduce the overall sort of impact of the types of energy that we're using. I would say the other thing that to me sort of resonates there is that we need to invest in upgrading our energy grid and our systems. And I think one of the things that's interesting about aviation is that it requires sort of a high bar for what those energy requirements look like. And I do think that if we look at what that high bar looks like and try and plan backwards from that, you could actually look at these infrastructure sites as potentially increasing grid resiliency in communities, offering sort of especially as other capital comes into the market to meet aviation requirements. I do think there's a pathway there where you can start spreading the benefits to a lot of other modes that are also struggling, including communities themselves who are also struggling. Airports currently, right, who are investing in microgrid resiliency. There's a lot of challenges in the overall energy infrastructure landscape, and I think that's something that is not unique to AAM and something that if we can plan around the high requirements of AAM. And leverage their capital to support existing modes of transportation, we can really potentially hopefully make a dent.
Great. Mihir.
Okay, yeah, I mean, there is no denying that eVTOL is certainly much more sustainable than traditional helicopters and any other kinds of mode. But are we able, like, would the operators be able to operate them in a sustainable way? To do that, there are some factors which we need to think. Transporting anything on the ground, even low power, high power, electric, non-electric, is much more less energy intensive than actually taking something vertically off, traveling in air and landing vertically down. That's just the profile for operation. Now, when we talk about networks, when we talk about operational, when we talk about real-time operations, the nature of UAM is that it's all about travel time savings, and things like trip pooling, things like repositioning flights. When we actually talk about them, and in the literature, we have seen that the repositioning of UAM would be around 0.5 to 0.75 per flight. So you are actually flying an empty vehicle with almost same energy cost to be able to transport someone from one place to another. And then the trip pooling concept of a four-seater to be able, can you really hold someone for 10-15 minutes so you can club some other passenger on the same route just to get 50% of the load factor? Sometimes you may not be able to, and that's what's the point. It's in theory, it is sustainable, it is more energy efficient, but when we are talking about operational, and we will sometimes have to operate UAM in much more much less sustainable way than any other transportation mode, just to be able to maintain the market.
Great. All right, I'll give you each a minute to respond.
Well, I would posit that there is no market if you're having to maintain just an unprofitable market or one that is not at all commercially viable, which is to say, I think when we think about a methodical planning process, right, presumably you're going to be optimizing for less deadhead flights. I think you're going to be focusing on those trips, again, that are difficult or impossible to make, or that currently are not served by sustainable modes of transportation. And I think, you know, we talk about ingress time and egress time. I think that's still very heavily focused on this idea that you're making very short trips within sort of core dense urban environments and serving a very specific niche part of the population. I think there's been a bit of a revisioning around looking at how many people live in a lot of different places that are, again, not in these downtown areas. Leverage business model innovation in order to create sustainable operating models. And I think, there's also a lot of advancements in demand aggregation that can be leveraged to increase the capacity of each vehicle, and also ensure that you are creating the right types of trips. And to me, a lot of that comes down to business model innovation and down in the private sector to make sure that their products are competitive, that they offer value, and that they're not operating at a loss. And I think that is a core part of sustainability.
All right, Mihir.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point, Adrienne. And like again, there is no doubt then in theory, like you will want to, I mean, it is much more sustainable than any other ground transportation mode. But again, when you have to make a mode choice shift, sustainability, energy efficient is most of the times an afterthought. You are looking to save time, you're looking to save money, you're thinking about less inconvenience. And when these factors are in mind as an individual, you are looking for something like a mode which is better for you. So that puts a lot of pressure on operators to be able to cater that demand, and at the same time being able to be energy efficient. And again, I come back to my point that it's very difficult in urban space only to be energy efficient for urban air mobility.
Excellent. Actually, energy is going to be a challenge that all of transportation is going to have to tackle across the board. And, as we sort of double down on electrification, I think it's going to present some unique challenges. I did learn today about the poo bus. Have y'all heard of this? It exists in England. It runs on human waste. And the branding is, so Google it. But I think we are going to have to start to have a more creative conversation about how we're going to power the mobility fleet of the future, and how we are not going to, in doing that, double down on negative externalities to low-income communities of color across the board that are already bearing the burden of our existing energy use. So with that, now we're going to transition over to talking about investable opportunities. And I have to admit that phrase sort of turns my stomach. So instead, I would like to know, can you make money and do good at the same time? And if you are trying to reframe this conversation, Adrienne, to your very well thought out points about what this thing is, what this industry is, who it serves, et cetera, how do you also make a compelling case to the investment community, and what are those opportunities?
Yeah, so I will actually go back and start with energy. So if you want to connect sort of, I think what you're talking with investable opportunities, I think the way you de-risk the investment around AAM, right, which heavily relates to the infrastructure. Granted, the aircraft themselves is a sunken cost, right, to a certain extent. It's expensive to commercialize, and we understand that. I do think, however, there's both an economic and a moral imperative to update aviation technologies, whether it's through hydrogen, whether it's through battery electric, whether that's large aircraft, and whether that's small aircraft. I think there is a moral imperative to improve aviation technologies and their impacts on communities. I would say that where you really start de-risking the overall investment around advanced air mobility, and especially if we talk about the infrastructure, which I think Mihir has pointed out multiple times is really the challenging part. You focus on common infrastructure to other mobility and societal goals. That's really alternative energy systems, grid resiliency, battery systems, alternative renewable energy, and ecosystem enablers like deployment of sensor technology that again adds value to multiple types of mobility solutions, and not just mobility solutions, but again other social, economic, and sort of technical goals that need to take place. And I think you focus on early use cases, proven technological benefits, and how you enhance cost savings. But I think the sweet spot is you have somewhere in between a commercially viable site or network, a technically feasible site or network, and a regulatorily feasible cider network, and somewhere in the middle of that complicated Venn diagram, love a Venn diagram in this industry. Yes, well, I can only bring down Venn diagrams versus Mihir's very sophisticated tables. But yeah, I think somewhere in the middle is right your sweet spot, especially when we think about an initial network, which is really what's going to enable you to scale, which is again what sort of gets you to that price point of portability that becomes particularly attractive to people.
All right, great. Mihir.
Okay, so when we're talking about investable opportunity, it's very important to the and people who have vested interest in it and trying to ask ourselves that who are we trying to serve by this? And there is no denying that we all know who the target market would be. And in order to make money, you need to capture that demand. But do we really need a mode which is going to focus on high-paying customers? People are struggling in urban areas with loss in travel times, not being able to access most of the jobs. People relatively in low-income parts are not able to do work from home. They want even better, more efficient, and to say more economical ways of traveling to work in places. And why I focus on workplaces because if you want to say that they're going to be a mass transportation using UAM, you need to ask yourself. I mean, you need to tap into daily use or daily trip purposes. And apart from commuting, you just go for shopping, errands, and picking up kids from school. And there is no other trip purpose on daily purpose, which is more time sensitive than commuting. So being able to provide people with more cost efficient way of commuting to places who can't really work from home and have the option of telecommuting is the way to basically improve our urban transportation mode and not just focusing and building a lot of infrastructure, putting a lot of money on something we know is targeting a very limited part of our urban population.
All right, a minute each.
Well, I would just start by saying, Mihir, I'm not sure how many times you've tried to get from the North Valley to SoFi Stadium, which people of all kinds of income demographics choose to prioritize their spending on, but it is very, very challenging. And so I say that to say, again, I think we continuously sort of talk about this sort of commuter. That's how you have to capture the market. That may be a long range way of capturing the market, maybe a short range way of capturing the market. I don't think there's a crystal ball there. But I would like to say that I don't think anyone stipulated mass transit here. I think what we wanted to focus on was it a meaningful contribution to the transportation network? I have not seen many studies that say it's going to comprise more than 5 to 7% of all trips taken. If what we're asking is anything that is a new technology needs to functionally be mass transit, then you're pretty much limiting that to mass transit. And that is high capacity fixed route transit, or not fixed route transit, but it's high capacity. Cars are not high capacity, right? So, I mean, I just think we have to be careful with the terminology that we use. And the last thing I'll just say is that, if you look at the history of aviation, we have found many different ways to increase access by leveraging willingness to pay, by providing different levels of services, by customizing services. And I think that's been pretty successful if you look at generally what has become a much higher percentage of the flying population. And I do wonder sometimes if we limit ourselves in thinking about how we can be more creative.
Okay, yeah, that's right. But aviation in general is very different than urban air mobility. In urban air mobility, we are talking about very small margins for trips which are done much more frequently than aviation-related trips. And let's talk about a program which was proposed back in 90s using small aircraft transportation system, a SATS program which was proposing a 12-seater or 15-seater very focused airplanes which would be using less utilized airports. And when we are talking about excess distance and excess times, the program ran for 5-6 years, and later they realized that the location of existing airports is just not good enough for short transportation. For in aviation, we have found that only Excel why the focus on big airports is increasing, and why we are not focus like shifting the focus to less utilized airports, because accessing those airports is getting much more difficult. So
Just we'll stop there.
sure.
All right, because now it's time for their closing statements. So take us home, and I'll let Adrienne start.
Yeah, I'll make this relatively short and sweet because I think I'm just trying to sort of hone in on some of the key points that we've raised. I do think that there's an opportunity for community activation and placemaking utilizing new mobility technology, and I think that can include aviation infrastructure. My other slide is gone, but anyway, so I was going to say supporting and integrating intermodal connectivity, I think, is going to be one of the keys to unlocking aviation infrastructure, new aviation infrastructure. And I think I would really just encourage everyone, sort of the AAM industry can be a bit of an echo chamber, right? And I think we really need to break out of that echo chamber, think dynamically and think creatively about our products. We need to be specific about who's being served, why, what purposes, what benefits does that communicate? How do you communicate those benefits? And really start that process, because I think we've been highly generic. And that's not actually what's going to optimize AAM, right? What's going to optimize AAM, both from the perspective of the business and from the society, is a cross collaboration between multiple stakeholders and a very methodical planning process that weaves together what is fundamentally a whole lot of complicated factors and gets people talking in the same, although they may come from different backgrounds, the same vernacular around contributions and meaningful roles of this technology in society.
Okay, yeah, I would like to say that I'm a true believer in eVTOL technology. It has given, I mean, we have come so far along the curve, and there's a lot we can capture from this technology alone. And there are good purposes, there are use cases where eVTOL has an upper hand compared to alternative ways. There are urban cargo transportation. It's much easier to transport cargo than passengers with less risk and with more efficiency. And there are other case uses like airport shuttles, where the demand in the corridors exist already and people are looking for faster ways. So let's say a particular corridor from downtown LA to LAX, so you don't even have to think about trip pooling, you don't even think about deadheading. There exists enough demand to be able to operate this more sustainably, and that's our focus should be. And we should not lie ourselves in saying that this mode is for all. You can take it from anywhere in the city and get anywhere to the other part of the city. But we need to focus on the use cases which we can develop, and we need to take into account community perception during the development. There have been more developments in past where we didn't care about things like noise, safety, and later got a lot of opposition from communities, and we need to improve that particular part of our development, where we take into account all the possible problems community can face, and overall together build a useful and more sustainable use case for urban air mobility, and just not claim that there are going to be hundreds of eVTOLs flying and you will be able to save 15 minutes just by taking this compared to your ground transportation.
All right, let's give them a round of applause, please. And I do want to say I wasn't here, but I've heard now multiple reports of the AAM roundtable yesterday about how very lively it became when the discussion of racial equity and community engagement arose. And I will also say that, y'all, Los Angeles just elected our first female mayor. Second African-American mayor. And when she was in Congress, Ms. Bass, Madam Mayor, was a member of the Quiet Skies Coalition. So she has spent a lot of her career thinking about how to make sure that community does not become, sort of overcome and overlooked in these discussions, that we value the public space, the ability to look up in the sky and see clouds. And that we take that seriously, and that we think about, for 5 to 7% of the sort of trips, what do we give up and what do we receive in exchange? It is way past time to ground that conversation, mind the pun, in specifics for communities. And I will just give you one anecdote before turning it back over to Steve, which is that, when I was at LADOT and we were working on this, I received a lot of communication from the Federal Aviation Administration going back and forth. And the FAA was using this word community in their letters. We want to think about community. And I thought, how amazing. This is incredible. They're talking about community. This is great. And it slowly dawned on me that when the FAA said community, what they meant was industry. And right now, that's the conversation that's occurring. So it is a moment for all of us to come together and see, can we, as Adrienne sort of call to action inspires us to do, can we truly listen to alternative perspectives on this in a way that is not defensive? Can we own the mistakes of the past and recognize that it is not acceptable for us to continue to repeat them? We do so at our peril, because we are connected. And the role of mobility and transportation is really quite simple. It's just to help every single person achieve the dream that they have when they wake up every morning, whether that's to take their kid to school, to lift their family up out of poverty, or just to go meet their friends for a drink after work. So with that, I will thank Steve again, our host, and thank Adrienne and Mihir. And thank you all for being a great audience. Really appreciate it.